It's 3:23 in the morning, and a 27-year-old man is sitting in the back seat of a car, moving through the dark somewhere in Massachusetts. He has his phone in his hand. He's texting his sister. The message he sends is 4 letters, NFL. That's it. That's all he writes. A few minutes pass. He sends one more message, just so you know. And then Odin Lloyd is never heard from again. Hey, come sit down with me for a second. If you're new here, every week I sit down and tell you a true crime story, the way it actually happened. All of it, not just the famous parts. Today I'm talking about Aaron Hernandez. And I know some of you have heard this name. Some of you watched the Netflix documentary. Some of you remember exactly where you were when the news broke. But I want to tell you this story the way I actually understand it now. After months of sitting with it, after reading Aaron's brother's book, after going down every rabbit hole I could find. Because here's the thing. This story gets covered as a sports story, or a crime story, or a cautionary tale about fame. And it is all of those things. But when I actually sat with everything I found, what this story is really about is systems. Systems that protect certain people, systems that fail certain people, and the moment those two systems crash into each other and take innocent lives with them on the way down, I need to be honest with you up front. There are some genuinely dark places in this story, including loss of life by one's own hand. If that's not where you are today, take care of yourself first. The story will be here. For everyone staying, thank you. I'm glad you're here. Because the version of this story most people tell leaves out the part that matters most. And the part that matters most is a man named Odin Lloyd. Let me tell you who Odin was before I tell you anything else. Not where he was born, not his stats, not his connection to Aaron Hernandez. I want you to know him first. Odin Lloyd grew up in Boston. He played football linebacker for a semi-pro team called the Boston Bandits. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He worked as a landscaper. His neighbors described him as someone who kept to himself, who worked out at the park near his house, who had one of those faces that just made you feel like things were going to be okay when you saw him. His mother's name is Ursula Ward. She describes Odin as the man of the house, his sister's keeper, the person she called her strength. And she describes one specific thing about him that I keep coming back to, his smile. She says every time you saw Odin, all you saw was his pink gum, just this huge, open, real smile. Like he meant it every time. He was 27 years old. He was dating a woman named Shania Jenkins. And through that relationship, he had come to know Shania's sister's fiance, this NFL star named Aaron Hernandez. And they'd become friends, actual friends. They had real things in common. Football, hanging out, video games, going out. Aaron had given Odin tickets to multiple Patriots games. Odin thought Aaron was his boy. He trusted him. I want you to hold that, the trust. Because that's the thing about this case that I couldn't get out of my head. Odin wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a target. He was a friend. And when Aaron texted him at 2:33 in the morning on June 17th, 2013, asking if he wanted to hang out, Odin got in the car. He got in the car because he trusted the person driving. We know this because of what he texted his sister while he was sitting in that back seat. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't in crisis. He was almost showing off. Did you see who I'm with? NFL. He was excited. He thought this was just another night, a late hang with a friend who happened to be famous. There's one more thing I found about Odin that I want to put here, and I'm not going to explain why it matters right now. Just tuck it away. The keys to the rental car, the car Aaron had rented, were found in Odin's pocket when they found his body. Like maybe they'd been handed to him as a gesture of friendship, or like they just ended up there the way things do when you're hanging out with someone you trust. Just hold that. We'll come back to it. Now I need to tell you about Aaron Hernandez. And I want to do this carefully, because this is where it gets complicated. Aaron Michael Hernandez was born on November 6th, 1989, in Bristol, Connecticut. He was the second son of Dennis Hernandez, a man the whole city of Bristol called the King and Terry Valentine Hernandez. Valentine. Beautiful last name for a story this brutal. Dennis Hernandez had been something once. A football star at Bristol Central High, a scholarship to UConn, Puerto Rican roots, and a scrappy determination that the whole city seemed to know about. But the dreams didn't go where he wanted them to. By the time Aaron was born, Dennis was a high school janitor. And something simmering underneath that gap between where he thought he'd end up and where he actually was had curdled into something that hurt his kids. According to Aaron's brother Jonathan, who wrote a book about all of this, Dennis physically abused the boys. Severely. The kind of abuse that makes kids threaten to call the police and the father handing them the phone and saying, "Go ahead, I'll make it worse when they leave." The kind of fear that never leaves a person, even after the person causing it is gone. And here's something I need you to understand about Aaron's father. He was also deeply homophobic, like aggressively so. Aaron was a kid who wanted to do cheerleading because his cousins were good at it and it looked fun. And his father's response was to use hateful, derogatory language toward his sons constantly, to police the way Aaron stood, the way he held his hands, to tell him over and over that any sign of softness in him was something shameful. Aaron was gay or bisexual. He would eventually, years later, from a prison cell, tell his mother. But the groundwork for that secret, the years of burying it, the shame, the rage at having to perform a version of himself that wasn't real, that started right here, in that house, with that father. And then, in 2006, when Aaron was a junior in high school, probably the best football player in the entire state, Dennis Hernandez went in for what was supposed to be a routine hernia surgery. He didn't come home. Toxic shock, gone at 49. And here's the thing about losing the person who was both the source of your deepest wounds and your greatest need for approval. It doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like the floor dropping out. After Dennis died, Aaron started using substances heavily. Started running with people. His cousin Tanya brought around questionable people, people with records, people who moved through the world like consequences were for someone else. And then Aaron found out his mother was sleeping with Tanya's husband. While the family was still grieving, Aaron stopped going home after that. He was 17 years old, and the world as he understood it had completely collapsed. And here is where the system first fails him. Or more precisely, here is where the system first decides that Aaron Hernandez is too valuable to hold accountable. Aaron got a football scholarship to the University of Florida. His SAT score was 420. The minimum for freshmen at Florida was 600. They let him in anyway because Urban Meyer wanted him. And when you're Urban Meyer at the University of Florida, you get what you want. Within months of arriving, Aaron, 17 years old, was at a bar called The Swamp with his teammate Tim Tebow. He got into it with the bar manager over a bill, and he struck him, hard enough to cause serious injury. This should have been treated as a serious offense. The lawyers for the university called. The coaches got involved. The bar manager withdrew the complaint. No charges, no consequences, nothing. Aaron received an unambiguous message that night, and the system sent it clearly. Your talent buys you out of this. He heard it. He believed it. And why wouldn't he? 3 years at Florida. Substance policy violations. An incident near a shooting in Gainesville that Aaron may or may not have been involved in, nobody pushed too hard to find out. He won the John Mackey Award, best tight end in the country. He got drafted by the New England Patriots in 2010. And in 2012, after 2 seasons where he was genuinely one of the best players in the NFL, the Patriots signed him to a 5-year, $40 million contract. Aaron Hernandez was 23 years old. He had never once in his life experienced a consequence for violence. Okay, I need you to stay with me here, because this is the part of the story where things start happening fast, and I want to make sure you have all of it. By the summer of 2012, Aaron had hired 2 people from his hometown as assistants. One of them was a man named Alexander Bradley, someone with a criminal background Aaron had known since college. Alexander's job was loosely defined. Get Aaron what he needed, keep him calm when he got paranoid or angry, and handle whatever came up. And what came up on a July night in 2012 was a man named Daniel Abreu bumping into Aaron at a club called Cure Lounge in Boston. Spilled his drink. That's it. That is the entire reason Daniel Abreu and his friend Safiro Furtado are gone. A drink got spilled. Aaron stewed on it for 2 hours, followed their car, pulled up next to them at a red light, and someone in Aaron's silver SUV opened fire on the vehicle. Daniel Abreu and Safiro Furtado were not criminals. They had no enemies. They worked cleaning buildings at night, honest work, sending money back to their families. They were just 2 guys going home from a night out. They were buried side by side in a Boston cemetery. And Aaron Hernandez went jet skiing in Newport, Rhode Island a few days later, posted up at a fancy harbor, living his life. The SUV got hidden in his cousin Tanya's garage. The police had footage of Aaron at the club that night, but didn't pursue it because, And I am not making this up, they thought it was just a coincidence that a famous NFL player happened to be there. 2 men were gone, and the investigation went cold. Then Aaron played a full season of football. 4 months later, February 2013, Miami Aaron and Alexander Bradley flew down to party with an old teammate. 2 nights out in Miami, Aaron spent $10,000 the first night. The second night, he got paranoid, convinced the men at the next table were undercover cops from Boston, and got into a confrontation with Alexander over a bar tab and a forgotten phone. On the drive back north, Alexander fell asleep in the back seat. He woke up with a weapon pointed at him. The next morning, police found Alexander in a parking lot with a serious wound near his eye. Aaron had already flown back to Massachusetts. He assumed Alexander hadn't survived. Alexander did survive. He lost his right eye. He needed multiple surgeries. And when the police came, he refused to cooperate. He wanted to handle this himself. What followed was months of increasingly unhinged text messages. Alexander demanding $5 million to stay quiet. Aaron countering with $1.5 million, negotiating back and forth like they were haggling over a used car. Not over the fact that Aaron had seriously harmed a man and left him behind. No charges were ever filed. Aaron was still playing football. And here is the thing I keep turning over. At this point, Aaron had committed 3 violent acts that we know of. 2 of them took lives. 1 left a man permanently without sight in one eye. And he was still playing, still getting interviewed, still signing autographs, still being held up as a face of the most successful franchise in NFL history. Nobody stopped him. No one had ever stopped him. Now, I need to tell you about the night of June 14th, 2013. Aaron and Odin went out to a club. To this day, prosecutors and investigators have different theories about exactly what it was. And I want to be straight with you. Nobody knows for certain. What we know is that Aaron got upset watching Odin talk to some people at the club. The leading theory is that these were people connected to the men Aaron had been responsible for the previous year. People who knew things. People whose presence in Odin's orbit meant Odin might know things too. Another theory, reported by Newsweek and multiple law enforcement sources, is that something about that night threatened to expose a secret Aaron had been keeping his whole life, that he was gay or bisexual, and that Odin knew about a relationship Aaron had kept hidden. We may never know which theory is right. Maybe it was both. Maybe neither. What we know is that Aaron stormed out of that club furious, and that the next day he texted his friends, Ernest Wallace and Carlos Ortiz, "You can't trust anyone anymore." Then he texted Odin about hanging out. At 2:33 in the morning on June 17th, surveillance cameras show Odin walking out of his apartment in Boston's South End, getting into a silver Nissan Altima with Aaron, Ernest, and Carlos. Odin tests his sister. "Did you see who I'm with?" She doesn't respond right away. Then, NFL. Then at 3:23 a.m., just so you know. Investigators think that last message, just so you know, was Odin's way of leaving a record. A quiet insurance policy. Like some part of him sensed something was off and he wanted someone to know where he was, who he was with, not panic, not screaming for help, just so you know. That was his last message. What happened between 3:23 and when they found his body? We don't know exactly. We know where they went. We know how it ended. Odin Lloyd was found with multiple gunshot wounds and left in an industrial park in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, less than a mile from Aaron Hernandez's mansion. The same neighborhood Odin had no reason to ever be in, except for Aaron. A jogger found him the next morning, and I need you to hear this part. Odin Lloyd's mother, Ursula Ward, had to be told that her son had been found in an industrial park less than a mile from his famous friend's house. I think about that phone call a lot. The police got to the crime scene, and a senior detective said immediately, this was a sloppy job. There were shoe prints in the mud, tire tracks, a partial cigarette, a white towel, and a piece of gum, a spent shell casing with gum, stuck to it. Aaron Hernandez's gum. DNA confirmed. They matched his shoe prints to surveillance footage from the same night. The cell towers tracked his phone along the exact route to the industrial park. Surveillance cameras at his own house showed him coming home after the time of death holding what appeared to be a firearm. They also found, in Odin's pocket, the keys to the rental car that Aaron had rented. 9 days after Odin Lloyd's body was found, Aaron Hernandez was arrested at his home in North Attleboro. 6 or 7 police cars pulled into the driveway. A sports writer named Greg Bedard was outside that morning. Aaron came out in handcuffs wearing a white t-shirt. The shirt wasn't on properly. His arms weren't in the sleeves, right? And Bedard said in that moment, he looked at Aaron and thought, this is not going to end well. Less than 2 hours after the arrest, the New England Patriots released Aaron Hernandez from the team. The owner, Robert Kraft, said he felt he had been duped. Bill Belichick gave a 7-minute statement in which he barely mentioned Aaron's name. And now let me tell you about two things that happened after Aaron was convicted that I think most people don't know, and that both of them, in very different ways, changed me when I found them. The first is what Aaron did the night before he passed. It's April 18th, 2017. Aaron had just 4 days earlier been found not guilty in the trial for the deaths of Daniel Abreu and Safiro Furtado. He was in the courtroom when that verdict was read. And for the first time anyone had ever seen, he wept. He cried. His lawyer said this gave them hope that they could challenge the Odin Lloyd conviction next. That night, Aaron's cell door opened and he stepped out like it was any other day. Then he turned around and went back inside. Another inmate came in. They used a substance together called K2, and they talked about life, about God, about death. 2 hours later, the other inmate left. Aaron made his phone calls. The last one was to his fiancée, Cheyenne. She said later that the conversation was completely normal. He seemed fine. He went back to his cell. At 3 a.m., a guard noticed a sheet hanging over the door. He called out. No answer. He opened the door and found that Aaron had taken his own life. The floor was covered in shampoo, a sign he had not intended to be saved. On his forehead, written in his own blood, John 3:16, a Bible verse about God's love and eternal life. On the walls, symbols, an incomplete pyramid, an all-seeing eye. At 4:07 a.m. on April 19th, 2017, exactly 2 years after the day he'd been convicted, Aaron Hernandez was pronounced dead. He was 27 years old. And here is where the story gets genuinely strange. Aaron left 3 notes, one for Cheyenne, one for his daughter, a little girl named Avielle, and one for someone else. That third note has never been publicly confirmed, but there's strong evidence it was written to a fellow inmate named Kyle Kennedy, a 22-year-old serving time for robbery, with whom Aaron had formed a close, very close friendship in prison. Aaron's lawyer denied any romantic relationship. Cheyenne said she'd never heard the name. Kennedy's lawyer said their bond was deep, and that Kennedy believed one of the letters was meant for him. In the note to Cheyenne, Aaron wrote 2 words, "You're rich," because Aaron knew something he had done research, or been told by someone. And what he knew was this. In Massachusetts, there was a legal principle called abatement ab initio, Latin for from the beginning. What it meant was, if a convicted person passed away while their case was still being appealed, the conviction was vacated, wiped, like it never happened, which meant the Patriots might be legally required to pay out his remaining contract, which meant the wrongful death lawsuit from Odin Lloyd's family might be blocked, which meant Avielle and Cheyenne might be financially taken care of. He had tried to turn his death into a legal strategy. Aaron's lawyer confirmed Aaron was aware of the rule. For a few months, it worked. A judge vacated the conviction. Legally, temporarily, Aaron Hernandez was innocent again. And I need a second with this. Odin Lloyd, found with multiple gunshot wounds, a man who had done nothing except be in the wrong orbit. And his mother spent a portion of 2017 living in a legal reality where the man responsible for her son's death had no conviction on his record. That is the part of this story that I cannot put down. But it didn't stick. In March of 2019, nearly 2 years after Aaron's passing, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court issued a unanimous ruling. The doctrine of abatement was, they wrote, outdated and no longer consonant with the circumstances of contemporary life. Aaron Hernandez's conviction for the death of Odin Lloyd was reinstated. And crucially, the court ruled they would never apply abatement again. Not in Massachusetts, not in any future case. The plan failed. And in failing, it changed the law. I want to stay here for a second because this is the place in the story where I want to zoom out. When I started looking at other cases, other athletes, other famous men, other moments where talent and money created a force field around violence, the thing I kept seeing was a pattern. And the pattern is this. The system that produces these men celebrates them, protects them from early consequences, and then acts shocked when it all comes apart. That system is not an accident. It is a feature, Ray Lewis, Baltimore Ravens, 2000. Two men, Jason Baker and Richard Lauler, both in their 20s, both building something from scratch in Atlanta, lost their lives after a post-Super Bowl party. Lewis was in the center of it. Evidence from one of the victims was found in his limousine. He told everyone in that car to keep their mouths shut. He pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, a misdemeanor. He got a year of probation and a $250,000 fine from the NFL. He was named Super Bowl MVP the following season. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2018. The deaths of Jason Baker and Richard Lauler have never been solved. Nobody has been convicted. Their families watched Ray Lewis become a Hall of Famer and said there was nothing they could do about it. The man's cream-colored suit, the one he was wearing that night, the one that likely carried evidence, was never found. Rae Carruth. Carolina Panthers, 1999. His girlfriend, Cherica Adams, was 8 months pregnant when Carruth arranged an attack on her. He drove ahead of her and slowed his car to block her in while someone pulled alongside. She was struck by gunfire 4 times. And while she was fighting for her life in her car on a Charlotte street, she called 911. She gave a description of what had happened. She gave them enough to convict him. She passed away a month later. Her son, Chancellor Lee Adams, was delivered by emergency C-section that night. He was deprived of oxygen. He has cerebral palsy. He is 25 years old now. He graduated from high school in 2021. His grandmother, Sandra Adams, raises him. Doctors told her he might never leave a wheelchair. He walks now. He talks. His mother saved him even while she was fighting for her own life. I think about that. Oscar Pistorius, South Africa, 2013. Valentine's Day morning. He fired 4 shots through a locked bathroom door and fatally wounded his girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp, who was 29 years old, a law graduate, a model, someone who, by all accounts, was genuinely trying to use her platform to speak about violence against women. He said he thought she was an intruder. The prosecution said they'd been fighting. The initial verdict was manslaughter, 5 years. Women's groups in South Africa were furious. They said he'd gotten away with it. The case was appealed. A higher court agreed. The conviction was changed. The sentence ultimately became 13 years, 5 months. He was released on parole in January 2024 after serving 8.5 years. Reeva's mother, June Steenkamp, said on the day of his release, "There can never be justice if your loved one is never coming back. We, who remain behind, are the ones serving a life sentence. Same thing, different country, different system. Same sentence from a mother who had to watch a famous man receive what she considered a fraction of what he deserved. And then there's the one that hit me hardest. Phillip Adams, former NFL player, not famous, not an All-Pro. In April of 2021, Adams went to the home of a doctor who had previously treated him and took the lives of 5 people before taking his own. His brain was examined afterward. He had severe CTE. His father believed football destroyed him. He did not qualify for compensation from the NFL's billion-dollar concussion settlement because he had retired before the cutoff date. Aaron Hernandez had CTE so severe it was described by the leading expert in the field as the worst case she had ever seen in someone under 46. His daughter's lawyers sued the NFL and the Patriots. His daughter, Avielle, who was 4 years old when her father was arrested, still receives his NFL pension, which was set up in her name before he went to prison. One man's CTE made headlines. One man's CTE made legal history. One man's CTE took 5 strangers and was absorbed into the silence of a system that had no mechanism left to respond. The question this pattern forces me to ask, and I'm not going to answer it, is this. At what point does a system stop being a victim of the people who exploit it and start being the thing that produces them? Here is what actually changed because of all of this. The law in Massachusetts changed. Abatement ab initio, that ancient loophole, is gone because Aaron Hernandez tried to game it, and his passing drew enough attention that the court decided to eliminate it entirely. As of 2019, when you pass away mid-appeal in Massachusetts, your conviction stands. The law books are different because of Odin Lloyd. Ursula Ward, Odin's mother, reached a settlement with Aaron's estate in 2018. The amount was never disclosed. She has said publicly that she forgives Aaron Hernandez. that when she heard he had passed, her first thought was, I pray to God he made peace with you before he did what he did. She goes to Odin's grave almost every day. Every Saturday morning, she feeds people experiencing homelessness. She does it in Odin's name. Shiana Jenkins Hernandez filed a lawsuit against the NFL and the New England Patriots on behalf of Abiel. A federal judge ruled that because Aaron was in prison when the concussion settlement deadline passed, he was effectively considered retired. The lawsuit was limited, the NFL's liability was capped. Abiel Hernandez's father passed away when she was 4 years old. She is 12 now. She will grow up knowing a version of who he was that is complete in a way he never allowed himself to be. And Dr. Anne McKee, the neuropathologist at Boston University who examined Aaron's brain, kept working. Her research has now examined hundreds of brains. The question of what football does to the people who play it at what age, for how long, under what conditions is a real and ongoing scientific conversation that Aaron Hernandez's brain made harder to look away from than most. Okay, I'm coming down from this. I've been doing this for a while, and every case lands differently. Some are sad, some make me angry, some I work through and then set down. This one I set it down and it kept coming back. Not because of the famous parts, not because of the NFL or the $40 million or the mansion or any of that. It keeps coming back because of Odin. Because Odin Lloyd did everything right in the ways that matter. He built his life. He played his sport. He loved his family. He trusted his friend. And he texted his sister, just so you know, because something in him, something quiet and human and not dramatic at all, wanted someone to know where he was. He was trying to leave a trail. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He just quietly tried to make sure someone knew. And then the keys. The keys to Aaron's rental car were found in Odin's pocket. Someone put those keys in his pocket at some point that night. Either Aaron gave them to him as a gesture here, you can drive, or they ended up there the way things do when you trust someone completely. When you think you're among friends, when you're not watching what's going into your pockets, because why would you be? I think about those keys a lot. I think about what it means to extend that kind of trust to someone, to carry their keys in your pocket because you didn't think twice about it, to send a text that says NFL like it's a brag because you're proud to know someone who made it. I think about how different the night must have felt to Aaron and to Odin as the same hours ticked by. Odin Lloyd's mother still visits his grave. Almost every day, she goes. She takes him her presents because that's all she has left to give. And she has forgiven the man responsible, not because it was easy, but because she said holding on to it felt like drinking poison and hoping someone else dies. That's not a lesson. I'm not serving it up as one. It's just the truth of who Ursula Ward is. Which is to say, one of the most remarkable people in this entire story. She has more grace than this story deserves. The last thing I want to say is this. This story gets told as Aaron Hernandez's story, his fall, his tragedy, his CTE, his secrets, his passing. And those things are real and they matter, and I'm not dismissing them. But it started as Odin Lloyd's story, and it should end that way too. A 27-year-old man with a big pink gum smile, who played linebacker for the Boston Bandits, who worked as a landscaper, who was the man of his house and his sister's keeper, who trusted the wrong person, who sent a text at 3:23 in the morning that said, just so you know, he deserved more time. He deserved to go home. I hope you remember his name